at the psychology of the fold, why you can't let go of losing hands. Opening the river card hits the felt and something shifts in your chest, not your read. Your read was fine 20 minutes ago when this hand started. You had a reason to be in this pot, a real reason. The hand made sense, and now it's here, this moment, and the board has gone sideways, and your opponent has just put in a bet that doesn't feel like a bluff, and some quiet part of you already knows. You know? And yet your hand doesn't move toward your chips to muck. Your brain doesn't file this under clear fold, move on. Instead, it starts working, furiously. It starts building a case. It starts finding reasons. The timing of his bet, the way he's sitting, that one hand 3 hours ago where he showed a bluff. The fact that you've already put in this much, the fact that the pot is this big, the fact that folding right now would feel like, and this is the word that matters, folding right now would feel like losing. Not losing the pot, losing something else. And so you call. And he turns over the hand you knew he had. And you lose the pot anyway. And you sit there for a second in that specific silence that poker players know. The silence after a call you knew was wrong before you made it. This isn't a poker problem. It's a human one. Dapru, the core paradox. Here's the thing that nobody says out loud, but every serious player has experienced in their bones. Folding hurts more than calling, not financially. Mathematically, the fold is almost always cheaper. The math on this is not complicated. But math is not what's happening in that moment. What's happening in that moment is something much older and much more powerful than any pot odds calculation you've ever done. When you fold, the loss is immediate. It's right now. The chips that were yours, that you put into this pot with intention and hope, leave your stack permanently, and you receive nothing for them. No information, no resolution, no story with an ending. Just gone. When you call, the loss is also likely, but it's possible that it isn't. And that possibility, no matter how small, no matter how intellectually dishonest it is given everything you know about this specific opponent in this specific spot, that possibility is enough. It's enough to make calling feel like the option that still has a future attached to it. Folding is a closed door. Calling is a door that might still open. This is not weakness. This is not stupidity. This is the human brain operating precisely as designed. The pain of folding is immediate. The cost of calling is delayed. And humans, under pressure, will choose delayed pain over immediate pain with a consistency that would be almost mathematical if it weren't so expensive. The pot sits there. Your hand sits there. And your brain, running a cost-benefit analysis that evolution built for a world without poker, tells you calling is the option that still has hope in it. And hope, as it turns out, is extraordinarily expensive at the poker table. Masu, the psychological mechanisms. Let's go deeper. Because understanding that this happens isn't enough. You need to understand why it happens at the level where it actually lives if you're going to have any chance of changing it. The first mechanism is loss aversion. And I don't mean this in the textbook sense. I mean it in the felt sense. Research across decades and thousands of studies has established something that poker players experience every session without having a name for it. Losses hurt approximately twice as much as equivalent gains feel good. Winning $100 and losing $100 are not mirror images emotionally. The loss cuts deeper, always. This isn't a perspective issue, it's a physiological one. The part of your brain that processes loss is more reactive, more persistent, and more influential on subsequent behavior than the part that processes gain. What this means at the table is simple. The chips you've already put into the pot feel more significant than the chips you haven't put in yet. Intellectually, you understand the sunk cost fallacy. The chips in the middle are gone regardless of what you do. They don't belong to you anymore. Only the decision in front of you matters. But that's not how it feels. It never feels that way. The chips in the middle feel like yours, and calling feels like the only way to give them a chance to come back. Then there's the sunk cost. You've been in this hand since pre-flop. Maybe you 3-bet. Maybe you built this pot with intention, with reads, with a specific plan. You've told yourself a story about this hand, why you're here, why you're right, where this is going. And now the river is asking you to abandon that story before it ends. But it's not just the chips. It's the investment of self in the narrative you constructed. You built a case. You were right on the flop. You were right on the turn. And now the river is telling you that the story doesn't end the way you wrote it. Folding isn't just releasing chips. It's releasing the version of events where your read was correct, where your plan was sound, where the hand played out the way you saw it playing out. That's a lot to let go of. Then there's ego protection. And this is the one that operates most quietly because it doesn't announce itself as ego. It announces itself as logic. You're not going to fold because, and listen to how reasonable this sounds, because the pot odds are decent, and you've seen him bluff in similar spots before, and there's a flush draw that missed, and maybe he's betting the missed draw, and honestly, the call is not that wrong. All of that might even be technically arguable. But if you're being completely honest, and this requires a specific kind of honesty that's hard to access in the middle of a hand, most of that reasoning appeared after the emotional decision to call had already been made. The logic is not driving the call. The logic is justifying a call your ego already decided to make, because the alternative, folding and being shown a bluff, is one of the most viscerally uncomfortable experiences in poker. Not because of the money, because of what it means. It means you were right and you quit anyway. It means someone pushed you off a pot and you let them. It means the story ends with you on the wrong side of a dominance exchange. That's tribal stuff, old stuff, the kind of stuff that doesn't care about your EV. And finally, and this might be the most important one, there's narrative completion. Your brain is a story machine. It doesn't just process events. It organizes them into sequences with beginnings and middles and ends. And a hand that ends with a fold is a story with no ending. You put in the work. You built the pot. You made decisions. And then, nothing. A blank. A void where the resolution should be. Calling provides the ending. Calling closes the loop. Even if the ending is painful, at least it exists. At least the story completes. And your brain, which is profoundly uncomfortable with incompletion, will pay real money for the relief of a resolved narrative. You didn't call to win. You called because your brain needed the story to have a last page. Chakra, why smart players suffer more. Here's something that took me a long time to accept. Beginners fold more easily than experienced players. Not because beginners understand the math better. Obviously, they don't. Not because beginners have better emotional regulation. They don't have that either. They fold easily because they don't have enough identity invested in being right. They don't have enough self-concept organized around being a good poker player. They lose a pot and it doesn't mean anything about who they are. But if you've been studying this game, if you've been working at it, if you've built a real sense of yourself as someone who understands poker, you have something at stake that beginners don't. Your competence. When you know the math and can construct ranges and have real experience in the game, being beaten in a hand isn't just losing chips. It's a small piece of evidence that could be used to challenge the narrative you've built about your skill level. And your brain, which is deeply invested in that narrative, treats it as a threat. This is why strong players develop what looks, from the outside, like stubbornness. They don't call because they think calling is right. They call because calling is the only way to receive the information in a form the ego can work with. If they fold and they were right, they'll never know. If they call and they were right, if the opponent was bluffing, it validates everything. It confirms the read. It confirms the competence. It gives the identity something to stand on. And if they call and they were wrong, that's variance. That's the opponent getting lucky. That's anything except an indictment of the skill level that's been built over years of serious work. The more you know, the harder it becomes to admit you're beat. Because admitting you're beat isn't just losing a hand. It's losing an argument with the version of yourself that wanted to be right. The illusion of information. I had to see it. You've said this. If you've played poker for any meaningful period, you've said exactly this. Sitting back from a hand you just called on the river and lost, defending the call not on EV grounds, but on epistemic ones. You needed to see it. You needed to know. This is one of the most expensive lies poker players tell themselves, and it's effective precisely because it sounds like intellectual curiosity. It sounds like the kind of thinking a thoughtful, studious player would do. You're not just gambling, you're gathering data, you're learning, you're investing in long-run information that will make you better. Except you're not. The information you receive by calling the river, in the specific spot where you already know you're likely behind, where the read was already there before the call was made, is almost entirely worthless. You learn what he had this time, in this spot, with this board, with this dynamic. That information cannot be cleanly extracted from its context and applied reliably to any future situation. The scenarios are never identical enough for the information to transfer. More importantly, the read you would have built from watching how he played the hand, from the pre-flop action, the flop sizing, the turn decision, the way the bet landed on the river, that red is already there. You built it already. That's how you knew you were probably beat before you called. So what are you actually buying with that call? You're buying relief from uncertainty. You're buying the right to know for certain instead of knowing with high probability. And that distinction between certainty and high probability is worth approximately 0 at a poker table but feels in the moment like the most important difference in the world. You didn't call to learn. You called to avoid the feeling of not knowing. And that feeling, that specific discomfort of a story without an ending, of a question without an answer, of an uncertainty that just sits there, that feeling costs more per hour than almost any other leak in your game. Folding as a status threat. There's something else happening in that moment that rarely gets named directly. Folding feels submissive. Not always, not in every spot, but in the spots where folding is hardest. The large river bet, the hand you built, the pot that matters. There's something underneath the math and the psychology that's even older. Something that doesn't speak in terms of expected value. Something that speaks in terms of dominance. He's representing strength. You're being asked to stand down. And some part of you, a part that has nothing to do with poker strategy, registers this as a status exchange. He's pushing. Folding means he pushed you off. Calling means you refused to be pushed. This is tribal machinery running inside a card game. It's embarrassing to acknowledge, which is probably why it doesn't get acknowledged. But it's real, and it's expensive. The size of this effect correlates directly with how much your identity is organized around competence and strength. Players who think of themselves as aggressive, sharp, difficult to push around, and this is often exactly the self-image that serious poker players cultivate because it's adaptive in most spots, those players experience the status cost of folding most acutely. You've built a reputation at this table, even if only in your own head. You've built a self-image. You are not the player who gets run over. You are not the player who folds when the pressure comes. You are not the player who backs down. And so folding becomes about more than the hand. It becomes about who you are, about whether the story of yourself as a capable, aggressive, difficult-to-bluff player survives this moment intact. It won't always survive. You will be bluffed. You will fold the best hand sometimes. That's not a character failure. That's poker. The players who accept that, who can fold without it threatening the stable sense of their own competence, those players save an enormous number of chips across a career. The players who can't are paying a tax hand by hand to protect a self-image that doesn't need protecting. The reframe that changes everything. Here's the thing about folding that nobody explains correctly. Folding is not surrender. Folding is not weakness. Folding is not what happens when you lose. Folding is a business decision. A specific, precise, financially rational decision to decline a bad deal. Think about what you're actually being offered when an opponent bets the river. You're being offered a transaction. You pay a specific price. In return, you receive a chance, with specific odds, given your read, given the board, given everything you know, at a return on that investment. That's it. That's the whole structure. Sometimes that deal is worth taking. Sometimes the price is right. The odds are acceptable. The return justifies the risk. You call, not because you need to see it, not because folding would hurt, because the numbers work. And sometimes the deal is bad. The price is too high. The odds are too long. The return doesn't justify the risk. And when a deal is bad, you decline it. Not because you're weak, not because you're scared, not because you're giving up or backing down or submitting to pressure, because the deal is bad. That's all folding is. A declined transaction, a rational refusal to pay a price that isn't worth paying. Professionals don't fold hands. They decline bad deals. That reframe sounds simple. It might even sound like a semantic trick. But if you can genuinely internalize it, if you can get to the point where you experience the river fold not as a surrender, but as a business decision about whether this specific price is worth this specific return, the entire emotional texture of folding changes. The ego isn't threatened because there's no status exchange. You're not being pushed around. You're evaluating a transaction and determining that the terms don't work in your favor. That's not submission. That's judgment. And judgment is exactly the quality that defines good players. The practical mental shift. I'm not going to give you a checklist. You don't need a checklist. You need 3 questions that you can actually ask yourself in real time, in the middle of a hand, under pressure, that create just enough space between the emotional impulse and the action. The first, am I calling to win or to feel better? This question cuts through a lot quickly. If you can answer it honestly, and it requires honesty that most players never attempt in the moment, you'll know within 2 seconds what's actually driving the decision. Calling to win means the math works. The read supports it. The action has positive expected value. Calling to feel better means the uncertainty is uncomfortable. The narrative wants an ending. The ego needs protection. Those are different calls. Only one of them belongs in your game. The second, if I hadn't invested anything in this pot yet, would I pay this price right now from scratch for a chance at this outcome? This is the sunk cost question in a form you can actually use. Strip away everything that came before. Forget the 3-bet pre-flop. Forget the flop bet. Forget the turn decision. Those chips are gone regardless. Would you, sitting down right now, pay precisely this amount for precisely this probability at this return? If the answer is no, if you wouldn't make this investment fresh, then the previous investment is not a reason to make it now. It's just history. And history doesn't change the price. The third, what emotion am I trying to avoid right now? Not what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to avoid? Because often the call is not about winning the pot. It's about avoiding something. Avoiding the uncertainty of the fold. Avoiding the possible humiliation of being shown a bluff. Avoiding the narrative incompletion of a story without an ending. Avoiding the quiet indictment of a wrong read. If you can name the emotion you're running from, you've partially neutralized it. Not completely, but enough to make a real decision instead of a defended one. 3 questions. Not a framework, not a system. Just 3 honest moments in the middle of a hand that create just enough distance to act from clarity instead of from fear. The verdad's closing. Here's what separates the players who are stuck from the players who are rising. It's not reads. It's not range construction. It's not volume or study hours or access to the right tools. It's the relationship with being wrong. Players who are stuck need to not be wrong. They need the call to be right. They need the fold to be the mistake. They need the story to validate their judgment, their skill, their identity as someone who belongs in this game at this level. Rising have developed something different. Not indifference to being wrong. That's not realistic. And anyone who claims it probably isn't being honest. But a different relationship with it. A relationship where being wrong is information rather than indictment. Where the bad call reviewed honestly is more valuable than the bad call defended. Where even the fold that was wrong, even the fold that turned out to be the best hand, is simply a decision made with the information available, evaluated clearly, and moved past without ceremony. Folding is not the mark of a player who's afraid. It's the mark of a player who has separated their self-worth from the outcome of individual hands, who has built their sense of competence on the quality of decisions rather than the results those decisions produce, who understands that the pot is just a pot, that it doesn't say anything essential about who they are or whether they belong here. That kind of player folds when the math calls for it, without the ego making it complicated. They release the chips, they release the narrative, they release the need to be right in this specific instance, because they have a longer game in mind that doesn't require winning every hand to feel intact. The players who can't fold are paying for something with every bad call, not just the chips in the pot. They're paying for the story, for the comfort of the resolved narrative, for the protection of an identity that doesn't need protecting. And the players who can fold cleanly, precisely, without theater, are being paid. Not in that hand, maybe, but across thousands of hands. Across sessions and months and years of decisions made from clarity rather than fear. There's a moment. And if you've been playing seriously for long enough, you'll recognize it when it comes, where folding stops feeling like losing something and starts feeling like choosing something. Choosing precision over comfort. Choosing long-term clarity over short-term resolution. Choosing the player you want to be over the hand you want to win. That moment doesn't announce itself. It's quiet. It looks, from the outside, like just another fold. But something has shifted, and the moment you stop needing to be right in every hand is the moment you start winning the ones that matter.